Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last part of Future Sketches lunch lecture series, Thinking with Sand, which is about the future of software tools that we use to create and think. This lecture series is done through the MIT Media Lab, specifically the group Future Sketches, which is a group that works with code as a medium for art, led by Zach Lieberman. We are the group that works at the intersection of art, technology, and design. I'm so delighted to have a conversation with Amelia today for the next hour. This will be a more engaging session than the other sessions, which were more like lectures. This will be more of like a conversation between me and Amelia. Amelia creates things on the web, exploring novel interfaces, turning data into meaning and empowering developers with AI. Amelia builds tools that lets developers see beyond the code. Her creations bridge imagination and functionality, exploring the unexplored territories of interaction design. At GitHub's R&D, she experiments with AI and novel interfaces, shaping how we create in a world increasingly powered by intelligence and art. I first got to know Amelia when I came across her online web essay called Evolving the Infinite Canvas. And this essay was a really enlightening and really inspirational piece for me, where it was not only a kind of like a blog post style exploration of the concept of the infinite canvas. It also had these interactive elements that really drove home the points that Amelia was trying to make. So every single description that she had of what an infinite canvas can bring to creating tools and thinking about data information had an interactive example. So this is talking about how data can be kind of sticky and like the different ways that we can explore data. So you see on the right, she has a grouping, she created like a grouping almost like chart for the spatial mapped chart. So exploring data in linear as well as two-dimensional ways. And this just really like, I guess, really opened my mind to the ways that we can think about organizing and exploring the data online. This is my favorite part where she has different like different representations of the same kind of data. So you can have a canvas, a list, a grid, and a scatter plot. And I think this is just like a really nice way to really see through data. And her other really well-known interactive essay is called Fisheye for Text, where she talks about how you can kind of apply using LLMs a kind of to zoom in and out of text. And again, this is all interactive and just like really beautifully made. I also wanted to introduce myself a little bit since I've been hosting this lunch lecture series, and today I will have a more involved role. I wanted to introduce me and my work so you can kind of see where I'm coming from, and you know the way that I angle my questions and stuff like that. So hi, I'm Char. I am a live coder before I came to Future Sketches, which is this way of performing writing code. It takes coding and puts it in a different context. Usually when we code, it is this kind of unseen relationship between the programmer and the person who's consuming the code, and live coding kind of turns it on its head. And I would do this in places where people weren't expecting for there to be code, so like festivals and concerts and clubs. And live coding really puts the serendipity back into electronic music and visual performance. So you can kind of really feel the vibe of the room and stuff like that. And since I've been at the Media Lab, I've been exploring specifically with interfaces for writing code, and through my live code background, how I can apply that to creating engaging and more meaningful experiences with code as the basis of everything that I'm doing. So this was a project where I live coded AR, an AR environment, and I uh, displayed a QR code where folks could um, see that unfold in front of them on their own phones. And finally, I've been really thinking about how IDEs, which is integrated development environment, aka the software that we use to make software, how IDEs can be more conducive for creative coding. So really, I've been thinking about the software that we use to make software. And I've been working with, I've been doing a series of what I call fantasy IDEs. So for example, this is one that I made that had a multiple windowing system and a chatbot named Charbot that could answer questions about the code and stuff like that. So yeah, I've been just like working in this area of the software that we use to make software and thinking about thinking. So with that, let's get started. And I wanted to kick us off by asking Amelia more of like what motivates her and a kind of overview of the things that she would want to share so people can get to really know her work. And I'm just really excited about what we're going to talk about.
Fun article with the Washington Post about the George Floyd protests. There are just all of these live streams. This is kind of this new media that people are using to document live events. And we wanted to figure out how to take all of these videos and make it easy for people to kind of walk through the journey of the different days of those protests. Um, we had things from climate change research labs, making that a little bit more accessible. Things like election voters. How do you like dissect it by different metrics? And this was kind of a fun collaboration with USA Today. But just work like that where you take these really rich data sets and you make them digestible to people who don't have the time to go digging around in there. And then after, I guess at the same time, I guess one of the things that really compels me is just being disappointed with this current state of things. Like, I feel like we took static media and put it online, and we're like, you know, words speak for themselves. We've reached peak communication. And I feel like the web as a medium is inherently very interactive. And a lot of this stuff online just really isn't taking advantage of the fact that um, any person can go to a website and interact with it and have their own experience. So I've started doing a lot of these kind of explainers. This one's kind of a fun one, where D3 is this really complicated JavaScript library, and it's kind of just really hard to learn. So I did this series of breaking it down. What are the different parts of the library? And there's all these different pieces to the library. It's pretty massive. So I have different interactive pieces to help people learn what are the different parts of it. This is one I did on the CSS cascade, which is like how do browsers resolve styles that compete with each other. So there's like these different kind of like battle arenas that these styles go to if you have two things that are setting the color on the same text. And so it checks, do any of them say important? And then if one of them does, then that one wins. But adding these kind of like this mini map over here and then having quizzes throughout where you can kind of test your own knowledge. Just exploring different ways that we can take content that we could just, write a really long piece of text on, and thinking about what are the ways that we could teach these that might resonate a little bit better with people. Um, so
Just
that's what. that's about, yeah.
It kind of reminds me of how the classic example of when TV came out, um, reporters would just basically read what they would do on the radio instead of actually like exploring the medium and using it for what it is. I had a quick question I was wondering, is there any kind of way in these kind of interactions that you have put out in the world that people have used it that surprised you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I feel like I don't get a ton of feedback on how people do use the things that I put out there.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
I
awesome.
think it resonates differently with different people. Like some people, when something goes on Hacker News, it's of course controversial. You get the really nice comments and the really um,
Right. Yeah, it can be really.
uninformed comments.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, like people talk about I'm a visual learner or I'm not a visual learner. And
Mm,
I'm not sure like there are people who are visual and people who aren't, but I do think people like to learn different things in different ways. Uh,
mm,
so I think it like this is also one of the things that um gives me the motivation to write things because, everything's already been written about. If you think, oh, someone already wrote about this, I'm not going to write about it. One of the things I tell myself is um, different angles on the same content resonates differently with different people. So, like, someone could have written an article on an X already, but if I write something that's not subtractive, it's additive. And, the way I do it might resonate better with someone than the other one. So.
amazing.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. And so, um, what are some things that you've been thinking about more recently?
Yes, let us continue.
Yay.
Um, so after the pudding, I'm just going to drop their website because their stuff is great. Um, Pretend that's a URL. After the pudding, I went to GitHub, and like Shar said, I'm on the R&D lab, which is called GitHub Next, and our what we do is basically we explore the future developer experience. So it's basically just, thank you. It's basically just what are the things that could be better? And then we build prototypes to explore that. And a lot of this ends up being AI because it's this new, very powerful technology that hasn't been explored very much. And there's all these possibilities for the way to use it. And so let's see. One of the ones that's a little bit more related to what I've done previously is oh here, this one, which is on visualizing code bases. So oftentimes, pretty much always, we see our code bases as this list of folders and files. And we lose so many pieces of information here because everything kind of looks the same, which makes it easy to scan, but you lose like how big is a file? What type of file is it? What's inside this folder? There's this quiz here of how quickly can you find this test, and it's a lot harder here than if you did something like this circle packing diagram, which I'm not saying is the right way to do it. This was just a quick exploration, but here you have each file has a different color based on its type, and you can kind of see within folders multiple levels. So you can see like, oh, all of the CSS files are, I guess there aren't many. I started repeating the colors. These are the bash scripts, and all of the JavaScript files are kind of within this packages, and you have all these markdown files within this Docusource folder. So I get to do fun explorations like this. Um, let's see, is there another fun one? This one I think I keep thinking about is we have all of this stuff around the code that we write. So when you're writing code, you have to clone the repo, you have to open up your text editor. There's probably some specifications you have to open up in Google Docs. There's a design if you're making a web UI, you have to talk with your team on Slack. You have to look up documentation. They're taking notes. You have Zoom calls, and then you ship it. And then a month later, you need to work on that again. So you kind of lose all of this information. Um, and one of the reasons I wanted to explore this is that after the pandemic, we work remotely more and more. So can we take advantage of the fact that we're already doing this online to kind of throw all of these resources that we're digging up anyway?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I
and so
definitely know that I've been like cursing my past self for whenever I have to like pick up, yeah, old
yeah.
things.
And it's silly that like we have to do this all manually. Like, can't we build tools that do this for us so we don't have to go out of our way to kind of include this all? And so it's just exploring like, what if we had notes within our workspace and we had one workspace for each feature that we're working on, and we can split up tasks, or here's that mini map of files and see what other people are working on. Um, and so this was a really fun exploration that ended up being shells, but it keeps coming back to me of like, this feels like something that I would like someone to solve, at least.
Yeah, I feel like it would save so many hours of just developers bashing their head against the the code of the past. Even just like picking up code bases, like if you're like transferring the code base to a new developer, these kind of it's kind of like you needed like a bookmark in like the headspace.
Hmm. Yeah, there was this company called MakeSpace, or Sprout that popped up during the pandemic that I was so excited about. And it was, instead of Zoom meetings, it was like a canvas, an infinite canvas
Yes.
that you put stuff on, and like other people's heads would be around it, and like you would be on a video call.
Yes.
It
Yeah,
wasn't just people's faces, it was like websites and notes and code and all these things. And I wish they had gone further because I thought it was really compelling.
I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah, I think Max Bicker was working on that, which is
yeah, it
always
was a great team.
yeah. Um, this is always really exciting.
Yeah. It was kind of like Workspace, the project I was just showing, where you have all of this stuff, and it's kind of a durable workspace where you have like all of the media on it. Kind of reminds me of like GeoCities websites where they had so much more personality than than websites today.
Yeah,
Um, just makes them stick in your mind better.
absolutely. Um, so another question I had is a little bit of a little bit of a turn into the into more LLM stuff, which I know you've been thinking a lot about recently. Um, I was wondering, so you've been exploring how LLMs can be integrated into the cyclical patterns of thought and work, which I really, really loved how you talked about this, how it's such like a creating and thinking is like a cycle where um, you're and LLMs can kind of be a part of that process. Um, do you think you could talk a little bit more about that and how they might transform, and generally how LLMs can transform our relationship with AI tools?
Yeah, I love that. There's this anecdote someone told me a long time ago that has kind of stuck with me, and it keeps coming up where so when you watch a painter, uh there's kind of two stages that they have. They're either like up close to the canvas, actually putting paint on the canvas, and but every now and then they step back and they kind of look at it. And there's this evaluation step where you look at what the whole picture looks like and kind of plan your next step. And
Mm,
then you go back and forth. And it's kind of this um really tangible example of something that I think is really we do it for basically everything. There's this cycle of like planning to do something, doing it, executing it, and then stepping back and looking at it, and then planning your next step. And this is like, um, I had this piece where, um, which one is it? This one, where I kind of start with like, it's kind of like breathing, right? Where you take a breath and then it oxygenates yourselves, and then you breathe it out. You breathe out the CO2. So then it's like painting and it's like conversations, right? When we talk, we're speaking and then we stop speaking and we listen to someone else and then we plan what we're going to say. And it's kind of this cycle that last year I was at kind of an agent startup and it was applicable to how we might build interfaces around agents and how we might work with them. Um, and then I talked a little bit about like what these affordances might help with. Yeah,
Mm.
where yeah, sure.
I think this is also perfect in the context of future sketches. We always talk about how code can be more like painting. And I always say if Bob Ross was a coder, I think he'd be a shader programmer because it's like when you make mistakes, it still looks kind of cool.
Totally.
Yeah. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about like what you think LLMs are good at.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the one last thing with that is
Oh yeah.
like there's this important part of getting your thoughts out there.
Hmm.
So I have this one piece, one row of random thoughts of like, how do we think with chatbots? And this is something I do a lot, which is like, I just like talk into the microphone or with my fingers, I type. And then like you could do that and then read what you said, but there's something about saying it to a chatbot and saying like say this back to me.
Hmm.
Um, there's this term called detachment game in psychology, where you kind of get your thoughts out there and then they become outside of your body, right? And especially if they're transformed a little bit, you can kind of read them anew. And so it's part of this cycle where like you say things, you read them a little bit transformed, and then you kind of evaluate them and have new thoughts and keep going. And I've been getting into this process more and more with ChatGPT or Claude, where it just helps me kind of evolve my own thoughts. And sometimes it interjects new things, but it's been kind of a really generative process.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's a great idea of like a complementary tool where it just helps you use a different part of your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Like one of the things I was talking to both ChatGPT and Claude about some of the stuff in the space that we might talk about today. And I actually had ChatGPT to the left, or when I was on my phone, I had ChatGPT and Claude going. And Claude was like my note taker, and ChatGPT was like the main collaboration. Um, and like there's this thing I keep coming back to of like tell the chatbots how you want them to respond to you. Like they can be, mentors
Mhm.
or collaborators or note takers. Like you can kind of define upfront the relationship that you want them to have and how you want them to respond. So over here I had ChatGPT, but then I have like ChatGPT has these really long responses that
Yeah.
like while I'm reading them, I want to remember parts of it. So I would just go over to Claude. And at the beginning of this conversation, I said, I'm going to use this space to take notes. Could you respond very concisely, please? Because otherwise, it'll just add more things for you to process. So while I was reading this, I would just say things over here and kind of keep track. And it's just kind of a nice way um, for to like get all those thoughts out there. And then one of the really nice things is at the end, you can take all of that information and have it transformed into different formats of the text that you talked about. So you can say, so for this one, I said, give me a digest of what we talked about and like, make it like 1 page long. And I could bring that over to Claude. And at the end of this conversation, I can say, just give me a list, like a bulleted list of the things I told you to remember.
Hmm.
There's this concept of like, uh, the same content but transformed into a different format. As it's just like disregarding hallucinations right now, which are a real problem. But
Yeah.
other than that, it's this really interesting new way to kind of transform the same content into different text or different modalities like audio or visual.
Yeah.
That feels
Yeah,
very
yeah, usually when I see people using ChatGPT and Claude, it's like they're kind of making them like compete for
Yeah.
the right answer. And I really like this where you're just using them for what they're, individually good at.
Or even just because they're different applications. Like I could use ChatGPT for both, but it's
Mm.
just annoying the way we've built interfaces around it where you have to like go from one chat to the other.
Mhm.
So it's just weirdly because they're different applications that makes them really nice to use together.
Yeah.
Um, you asked, okay, so I have these slides on what LLMs are good at, which I think is important to think about before you build interfaces with them. So this is kind of a list that I keep going back to. And I can just run through these quickly of like, okay, so what are they good at? They're good at raising the floor. So um, if you have a PhD in a topic, you're probably going to be a much better resource about that topic than, say, ChatGPT. But for topics that I don't know anything about, uh, they're going to be a much better resource, telling you about, um, I said oxygenate your cells earlier, which I'm
Mm.
sure is the wrong way to say it, but ChatGPT would have a better way of putting that. So there's this concept of like raising the floor for like broadly across disciplines. That like now I have this resource that will cater to me to kind of teach me the basics of chemistry, which is kind of a new thing.
Mhm.
They're really good at remembering lots of things. Like I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but these models are really good at remembering. If I told them, they could remember my breakfast for, my whole life.
Mhm.
Uh, and these days, it's usually by adding text to their context window. Um, they're really good at customizing, personalizing. So bringing the interface further towards the way humans like to work. I
Mhm.
stole this slide from an earlier talk of, back in the day, it was more of humans um, contorting themselves to work with computers in the way we had to. We had punch cards, we had coding languages that were way less accessible, and now we have JavaScript, which is way easier to write. Um, and then even past that, we have LLMs, which speak to us in natural language.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's this concept of computers becoming more humane and like the interface gets closer to where I am, as opposed to me figuring out how to work with a computer. They're good at doing things quickly. So what if Mechanical Turk were 100 times cheaper and faster? Honestly, it's probably more than 100 times, at least faster these days.
Mm.
They're really good at transforming things between modalities. So this is like a Siamese kitten plays with a red ball of yarn. You could make that really long text. You could like really talk about its fur. You can make it into a poem. You can make it into sounds. You can have the image in all of these different styles. Um, of course, it's going to be like a lossy translation where you're adding details or losing details depending on the modality, but this feels like a kind of a new way to interact with a concept where you can transform it between modalities and between formats within one modality. Um, and this is one thing that I really like, which is transforming things into structured data. So here's a picture of a bookshelf, send it to Claude or something, and it'll output this JSON of what the books on the bookshelf are. And then of course there's all these things that they're not good at, right? They're not good at being trustworthy. They're not good at citing their sources. They're kind of this black box that you get answers out of. And you want to have, many grains of salt when you're dealing with generated content. They're not good at guiding things. They're not good at making small edits. I don't know. This is kind of a list of things that I think are very important. And I have this kind of similar slide down here, and then I'll stop talking of um, if we were to break up tasks into what the computer should do and what the human should do. The things that are really important to keep in mind are like taste making. That's like something we're really good at that we almost don't want to turn over to an LLM,
Mm,
managing judgment, Q&A, ethical decisions, and sense making. Like, it doesn't make sense for a computer to eat food for us,
mm,
uh,
mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
there's like parts of being alive that that like aren't in, like it's not just a thing to check off a checkbox. It's like,
That's like a beautiful relation to how Alan Turing said that like a computer can never taste a strawberry, you know, uh, just generally. Also, this is a perfect segue to our first audience question. So KP asks, do you think LLMs in a way are limiting as idea generators? If we all start from the same corpus of data, it could cause like a homogeneity of the start of ideas.
yeah, yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
There's this interesting concept of like there are some things that are kind of potentially going to be frozen in time,
Mhm.
like of
Yeah.
when all the training data was collected. Like React was a very popular front-end library for creating websites, and we have so much React code in the training sets that the models are really good at it. And it's like, well, if development largely becomes the output of LLMs and they're really good at writing React code, you can imagine like this basically just making React like the library that is used for front-end development for a long time.
Yeah.
Um,
It reminds me also of how, like I'm thinking more and more about how the discussions around privacy is also increasing, and that there might even be like a freezing in the data that can be even used. And that reminds me of how psychology as like a field relies a lot on experiments that happened in the 70s before there were a lot of regulations on how you can test it. You have to inform someone that they're in a test, as opposed in the 70s, people weren't really informed about if they were in a psychology test. And so there were a lot of like discoveries, but like where they kind of slowed down because of the ethics of whether this is okay were reviewed later on. And so I really think that that's gonna like us as a generation are gonna kind of be like baked into a lot of the future LLMs and
for
AI in general. Yeah, not just LLMs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like that. The other thing that this makes me think of is I was at some dinner party a while ago and someone was talking about how these models can never be creative because um, they're just remembering things that are in their training set,
Mm,
which is a whole discussion now. But it makes me think of like how artists, like when you make art, you're not just this genius that comes up with new ideas based off, your own thoughts. It's like a response to the world. So you can imagine making a system where you really integrate feedback loops
yeah.
of like it makes something, and then either a human or another AI has a response, and like they could live in a richer world than just like spitting something out there, which is kind of the way people work, right? Like everything's really iterative, where things don't just come out there and they're perfect. It's like a very iterative process where that feedback loop is very important. So uh, I think. I think they're a little limiting, but I think once you start adding in the richness of feedback from the world,
Mhm.
um, you open up the space of ideas. Um, I don't know if that's really responding to the question, but
100%. Um, we had another audience question from our very own Jessica from Future Sketches. Um, Jessica asks, I have a question for Amelia. Are there certain design patterns that are maybe underused, but you find super useful? For example, like the nested circles to represent the structures or drag and drop tree structures. And what do you like about them?
Hmm. I think I like anything fun.
Yay!
Um, I have this conversation with my husband sometimes because he's an academic and like data visualization in academic circles is very much like a means to an end. And also like they tend not to get very creative, right? It's like I want to make this point, so I'm going to make a bar chart or a box and whiskers chart. And I think having been in industry and also like having to make things for like marketing campaigns, like there's a lot more richness that can be introduced to visuals that um isn't necessarily for a specific purpose, but it adds all of the like it ends up adding without like a very academic reason why. So you can do some like really fun things like you can argue that the circle packing I showed earlier could have been like a tree map, but there's something about them being circles and like they feel like more coherent objects than something in the tree map that I don't know. I'm kind of rambling at this point, uh, but I think like there's a case to be made for having fun with interfaces and for design patterns where I think uh like the fact that we have to quantify some things in order to justify them in widely used websites
Mhm.
um, or attach them to business reasons, I think that loses a lot of uh, the richness and potentially some of the utility of I don't know, things that are fun
Yeah.
or
Not to make it so dramatic, but I feel like it's really speaking to valuing human agency over technological determinism. Okay. So I have another question from the audience. This is actually like perfect because usually we have like 40 minutes of a talk and then 20 minutes of like Q&A. It's like
there's never enough time for the
I
Q&A.
know. So this is finally we have. So this is from Leslie. A broader question I have, well, we can ask it now, is how do we approach using search engines now versus AI chatbots, and how does this inform your use of digital archives?
It's an interesting question. I think like if we break down the reasons we use Google now,
Mhm.
right? There's like things that have a specific answer, right? There's like finding a website, right? Like that doesn't really make sense for an AI chatbot to do. Um, there's like I have this question and it has a specific answer, which I think you could use a search engine or a chatbot for, although chatbots are really nice for making things more bespoke. Like um, I'm in Oakland. I have a dog. It's this type of dog, and he likes to wear red sweaters. And I have a question about that. That like Google's gonna have a harder time answering, whereas um, chatbots, LLMs, is like a compression mechanism, kind of just will make the answer more catered to things that don't exist on the web already. Um, I've been using Perplexity a little bit more. I have a new baby and I have a lot of baby questions. And sometimes they're more than like, why isn't my baby crawling yet? And like a little bit more customized. And I find that perplexity responses with many grains of salt, right? Like I'm not just going to take their responses as fact. Um,
Right. Yeah, especially with something that's as high stakes, the
yeah.
baby. Another question from Leslie. I might have missed this, but curious how LLMs have shifted your personal relationship with self-expression in conversation.
I feel like they've made like as because I do talk sometimes on how to think with LLMs, I push myself a lot more to use them for like, oh, maybe I can use them for this, or like, let's really try to push it because I think it's really easy. And I have this feeling normally of like we shouldn't, it's a hammer, let's not try to use it for everything, or like it's really like overhyped and everyone's just kind of trying to sell something. Because I've pushed myself more and more to try to find use cases of what they're good at. Um, I've started getting into a pretty generative workflow, especially with the new O1 model from OpenAI. Uh, One of the things that I enjoy saying to it is like, I'll just like talk into a microphone about some thoughts about something like, how can we uh, change our relationship with computers using LLMs? Um, and a lot of the time it just spews back a bunch of stuff. But one of the things that I was using recently was like, tell me things that would be really not obvious that like have applications from different disciplines. And it's been pretty generative where it'll like tell me about something historical that I didn't know about, and kind of apply it to the thing that I'm thinking about. And I don't know, it's like having a really good person to bounce ideas off of who sometimes comes up with these gems that you're like, wow, I would never have put those things together.
Yeah, yeah, it's like your brain works is very differently than mine. Like, it's like I really like when I am talking with people like that and then having like something that obviously will work very different than how I work. Um, will really shake things up. Okay, here's a question from M. Renfro. Have you found that creating new systems and using LLMs under a capitalist incentive structure is any way limiting? Does this economic model affect the way in which you navigate data?
So I'm going to interpret this in a specific way and let me know if I'm not actually answering your question, but one of the things that drives my explorations always is I want to build tools that empower people instead of automating the things that they do. Um, and like this is part of what drove me to join the agent startup last year of like I there's like this whole tangent of like I feel like the technology right now is really malleable, and if nobody directs the way that we build on it, it's just gonna go, the dumbest direction possible. Um, Not to say that we did this with the web, but the web, you can imagine, 30 years ago was much more malleable, the way that we build interfaces around it. And now you're like, I'm gonna build this new browser and it kind of looks the same thing, but like the tabs are on the side, right? Like that's like innovation these days because we're so used to interacting with browsers in a specific way.
Mhm.
So I am like constantly feeling a little bit unsettled because I feel like now is the time to do explorations of how we want the interfaces to be built. And I like who knows if I'm actually have any good explorations or not, but uh, one of the directions I want to push things is in building tools that people can use as opposed to saying, oh, let's study how this person does their job and then figure out which parts we can kind of eat away at it with an AI. So I think I have this whole like thought that I'm working through of like what is a tool versus what's a service versus what's a machine and what really is automation versus empowering and like what sides of task make sense for either one. Um, and because of the world we live in, we have to build things in a way that um is like properly incentivized for companies, right? We can't just say uh, we think you should use this tool because it's morally better. We have to build something that also works for companies. So I think like figuring out the ways we should package up the capabilities of LLMs and not in a way that kind of freezes us in the jobs that we have now, but ways that kind of superpower us to um, slowly turn into better versions of our own jobs, if that makes sense. But kind of rambly.
I love it. And I know this is like I love this next question because it's you really can tell that we're talking to like designers in the crowd. So the next question is by Jimmy. My question is, why is it still common-ish to advise in data viz to avoid anything with the z-axis because it confuses the message and 3D doesn't work? This thinking seems stuck in print magazines, and now 3JS, WebXR, or D3 do so many things, so many other libraries bringing interactive game engines, graphics to the web. How does Amelia think about 3D and complex data communications, especially in any thinking about immersive VR or mixed reality? I love when people have very specific questions.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I'm the right person for this because every time I talk to ChatGPT and I say be innovative,
Yeah.
like be very innovative, it always goes to VR or AR. And like I haven't done much with VR or AR because I think a lot of the things that at least I think of are like a hammer looking for a nail. Like I think it's cool. I want it to exist. And I think there are many applications, but the things that come up first are like oh, let's do the same thing but in 3D and it'll be cool because it's in 3D. But I think as the hardware gets more accessible, and people get to play around with the format more, I think there's going to be more and more like really sensical uh, and like innovative instead of just, taking something and making it 3D the same way we took articles and put them online. What is this?
Oh, I have a friend, Kat, who's working on imagining different ways that we can explore data through kind of like interfaces that are attached to our hands. And so all of this is like she doesn't use real data, it's all generated in Touch Designer. But she's exploring just like the interface of her hand and data. And I think that there's like I in her work I see how fruitful this space is in thinking about like the future of like how we're going to interact with data and using like a more human-centered interface. Um, yeah.
I've been seeing these. They're so cool, but I'm afraid to click because I know it's going to make noise.
Yeah, 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 exactly. But yeah, I think that these images really just get to the point of what she does. Okay, and then the next question is from Laura. What do you think are the immediate future of LLMs interfaces?
It's a good question. I think the immediate future is going to be kind of like things innovate a little bit more slowly than I would have expected. I think, I think so. This is one of the things that I'm exploring that I probably can't talk about much, but there's this like evolution of generic tools around LLMs as people become more used to the technology. Um, where like first we had like GPT playgrounds, and then we had chat where we had historical context, and then we now we have like Notebook LM or artifacts where we have this shared artifact. I think the next evolution is going to be a generic tool that's the next level where you get to do a little bit more of like state management and state flow, where you can take the output and combine it with another input and kind of uh, like scripting or with LLMs where you don't have to script, but it's not necessarily a no-code tool. I think there's something in that space where it kind of breaks down these workflows into things that are really repeatable. So people who aren't developers can do things that are the next amount of complicated with these models.
Um, Amazing. We have so many more questions, but only so little time. I'm just gonna skip to a question. I'm being very selfish. I'm gonna skip to a question that I was really, really excited about from Coven, who was the first speaker in our talk series. Coven asks, it's been fascinating watching your recent prototyping around email. What originally sparked that? Email has been pretty much the same forever since 1971. So this is refreshing. So there are other applications. Are there other applications that you'd be excited to revisit or encourage others to? What opportunities do you see?
Yeah, the email exploration was really fun. It's like a very boring my personal motivation, which is my baby had colic and I was on mat leave and really sick of debugging baby.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. So I was like, give me a computer. I want to do something fun. That makes sense. But I think like email is one of those things that we don't really second guess, and it just like we've gotten used to how much it sucks. And
Yes.
like you think about emails, it's like newsletters, direct correspondence, cold outreach,
Mhm.
like work tasks, scheduling. Like there's all these different things that are treated exactly the same. in email, and you're supposed to interact with it with the same interface. And I think the same thing that motivates most of my explorations, which is like, why are things this way? And can I build something that at least makes someone else build something good so I can use it? That was kind of where I was going with the emails. So I would love someone to build something good about email. I wanted to release it, but then I was like, wow, this is like a lot of personal information, and I don't want to be responsible for that while I have a full-time job that is not this tool. So someone else should build it. I would love that.
Nice. Is it okay if we go over like a couple 5 minutes?
I got time.
Okay, I just wondered if you have any like hard cutoffs. As I wanted to ask another question before we wrap up. This is from Nora. Do you see AI search engines like Perplexity? Sorry, I lost it. Oh, like Perplexity, going down the same path as traditional search engines where their paid results and SEO dominate and can obscure relevant slash accurate results.
Yeah, this happened to me the other day. It was, oh my God, it was something so ridiculous. I was looking up like it was like what wheat should I eat or something
Yes.
random, and like Perplexity said like it was in the suggested questions next. It was like, oh, what do you want to ask next? Is it like what corn should I eat, or why does Whole Foods have the most delicious wheat ever?
No.
It was like there's no world in which that was the next thing that I would ask. It was like this sponsored post, which is like it's an interesting way to explore how might we have a business model around this. And like I think like we as digital humans are a little bit selfish with the things that we expect for free. Like I worked in the publishing industry for a while, and like a lot of time and money and effort goes into writing really good news articles, and we kind of just expect them to be free. And once we hit paywalls, we're like, how do I delete this immediately? Which like I get, but um it's going to be really interesting seeing them figure out the right business model, and in a way that doesn't kind of like sour people on it. And really, really hopefully they don't do it a way that is confusing for people and like you said, obscures things that are accurate and relevant versus like the things that they need to push as a business.
Um, I wanted to, gosh, yeah, is there any last things that you wanted to bring up? There's so many more questions in the chat that I don't think we can get to, but I'll send you a copy of like the questions. But I wanted to also leave space for you if there's any like things in the future that you wanted to, or kind of ideas of what's to come in this area of research and what you've been thinking about. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that I got excited about thinking about this,
Yes.
which is like we think about text versus other modalities as an input, but also as an output. So because these chatbots are inherently really text heavy,
Mhm.
uh, like the discourse is like chatbots are the thing, and like reading a lot of text is exactly what we want to do. But I think there's a lot to be gained by thinking about what text is not great at, and like text is a very linear concept. Like you have to read it from start to finish, unless you're like summarizing or something like that. But like all of your attention kind of has to go to text, and you lose a lot of the things that your other senses are good at. Um, so this is kind of my like data viz background coming out of like, this is from Tamara Munsner's data viz book of like, there's these different attributes that we can map data metrics onto. Like we can change the position or the size or the color and the curvature. And there's like, if you look at human perception, there's different things are like we're faster at processing or are more meaningful for us or are easier to be accurate about measuring. And I think there's something about like the richness of a visual language that we're going to start rediscovering of like, oh yeah, it was really good. And like we have interfaces for a reason. Like here's an example of I built this dashboard for myself as I was looking for houses, where there were just things that were specifically catered to me of like highlight things that are above my threshold for square footage, or there's this axis for houses of like things that are have more crime but have higher density versus so I made those things pink versus the things that are blue are like lower crime but lower density and it's not close to things. So and I like highlighted the ages that would be nice for me to live around. So like even the fact that this dashboard would like 10 times my speed of parsing, you know, the 100 listings that come up a week. Um, and then Shar and I were trying to remember the name of this movie Arrival, where there's like this complicated visual language that the aliens came up with in the movie of like there's this richness to visual input where you can like process patterns and texture. And I think there's a lot of exploration to be done in the different modalities that we can present information in that will be differently meaningful and useful to us as humans. And I think, I don't know, I think that's just a really generative space that no one's really thinking about right now.
Absolutely. And I really like this bringing up of arrival because it's again it's around the way that you speak and you use your brain as you communicate changes the way that you oh, I don't want to give away the movie. I was about to like say something that kind of gave away the movie. But it's like the general idea how Ted Chiang came up with the concept is like the way that you speak changes the way that you think. So I think that's a really great reference and also a perfect way to, and I know I want to keep going forever, but unfortunately I know we all have, you know, the rest of our days or evenings. Uh, so I wanted to say thank you to everyone and thank you to Amelia for joining us for this final lunch lecture. And we're going to keep the conversation going, and we'll post these talks on YouTube, so you can you know can continue the discussion on YouTube and other uh, uh, platforms. We don't have any more scheduled talks, but if you wanted to know more about the future of what future sketches will offer in terms of programming, we mostly post on our Instagram about upcoming events. I'll post that here. And then we also are on other social medias as just future sketches. So with that, yeah, thank you everyone so much.